They finally said the words they have been avoiding for far too long. And the moment your name came up, their entire voice changed. This wasn't just sadness. This wasn't just missing you. They admitted there is one decision they would erase if they could go back. Because losing you cost them something they never believed they could lose forever. Listen carefully. Because what they finally revealed wasn't a casual confession made during a weak moment. It came after months, maybe even years, of trying to convince themselves that walking away from you was something they could live with. They tried to act strong. They tried to move forward. They told people they were fine, that everything happened for a reason, that perhaps the two of you were simply meant to take different paths. But somewhere underneath every smile, every distraction, every attempt to rebuild their life, there was one truth they could never silence. They knew they had let go of someone they should have fought harder to keep. What makes this confession so emotional is that they didn't blame timing anymore. They didn't blame distance. They didn't blame family pressure, misunderstandings, fear, or circumstances. For the first time, they looked directly at their own choices and admitted that the biggest regret wasn't simply losing the relationship. Their biggest regret was the way they allowed you to believe that you didn't matter enough to fight for. That realization has been sitting heavily on their heart because they now understand there were moments when you were waiting for reassurance, waiting for honesty, waiting for them to show you that everything you had shared meant something real. And instead of giving you that certainty, they pulled away. They admitted that there was one particular moment they keep replaying. A conversation where they could have told you everything. A moment where one honest sentence might have changed the entire direction of your story. They remember what you said. They remember the silence afterward. They remember wanting to stop you, wanting to explain what was really happening inside them, but fear took over. Pride took over. Confusion took over. And by the time they realized how much damage that silence had caused, you had already started protecting your own heart. Don't skip. Because this is where their confession became much deeper. They said losing you forced them to understand something they were too emotionally immature to understand while you were still close. Love wasn't supposed to be proven only when everything felt easy. Love was supposed to become stronger during the moments when fear, pressure, and uncertainty showed up. And when that test came, they now believe they failed it. They expected you to somehow understand what they couldn't say. They expected you to keep waiting while they figured themselves out. They assumed there would always be another conversation, another chance, another opportunity to return and make everything right. But life didn't stop for them. Time moved forward, and something inside you changed. You became quieter. You stopped chasing explanations. You stopped trying to force answers out of someone who wasn't ready to give them. And strangely, that was when your absence began becoming louder than your presence had ever been. They started noticing all the small things you used to bring into their life, the way you understood the emotions they didn't know how to explain, the way you remembered details everyone else ignored, the way you could sense when something was wrong before they even admitted it to themselves. They had taken those things for granted because they believed love like yours would always be waiting. Now they know differently. They opened up about nights when they almost contacted you. They would pick up their phone, look at your name, type a few words, delete them, then sit there wondering whether they had already destroyed the one connection they secretly wanted back. Sometimes they imagined you answering. Sometimes they imagined you ignoring them completely. But the possibility that frightened them most was imagining you had finally become completely indifferent. Because anger would at least mean there was still emotion. Silence could mean you had learned how to live without them. And that thought hit them harder than anything else. They confessed that people around them noticed the change too. Someone finally asked why they became distant whenever relationships were mentioned. Another person noticed how quickly they changed the subject whenever your name came up. And eventually, during one private conversation, they stopped pretending. They said, "I didn't lose them because love disappeared. I lost them because I was afraid to protect what I loved." Those words changed the entire room. Because after saying that, they admitted something nobody expected. There was something they had never told you about the period when everything between you started falling apart. Something happening behind the scenes made them question whether they were capable of giving you the future you deserved. Instead of telling you the truth, they made a decision for both of you. They convinced themselves that walking away would somehow protect you from their problems. But now they understand that by making that choice alone, they never gave you the opportunity to decide whether you wanted to stay, and this is the regret that hurts them most. They didn't just lose you. They took away your chance to hear the truth before everything changed. But what they revealed next explains why they have suddenly started talking about you again. Because recently, they discovered something about that old situation that completely changed what they believed back then. And once they learned the truth, the first thing they said was your name. The truth they recently discovered forced them to look at the past completely differently. For so long, they had been carrying one version of the story inside their mind, believing that what happened between you was unavoidable. They had convinced themselves that circumstances were stronger than love, that certain people around them knew what was best, and that walking away from you was somehow the responsible decision. But now they have learned that some of the things they were told during that difficult period were incomplete, exaggerated, or completely misunderstood. And when that realization finally hit them, they didn't become angry first. They became emotional, because suddenly they could see how different everything might have been if they had simply trusted the connection they had with you instead of allowing fear to make the final decision. They admitted that this new information brought back memories they had spent a long time trying to bury. They remembered the way you looked at them when you knew something was wrong but they refused to explain. They remembered the questions you asked, the reassurance you wanted, and the moments when you gave them opportunities to be honest. What hurts them now is realizing that you were not asking for perfection. You were asking for truth. You were willing to understand complicated circumstances, but instead of trusting you with what was happening, they shut you out. At the time, they thought silence would make everything easier. Now they understand that silence became the very thing that created the distance they were afraid of. There was one memory in particular that completely broke their composure when they spoke about it. It was the last time they felt that you were still emotionally reaching toward them. They could hear it in your voice. They could feel that you were giving them one final opening to explain themselves. And they almost did. They almost told you everything. They almost admitted how scared they were, how much pressure they were carrying, and how terrified they were of disappointing you. But instead, they gave you a short answer. They acted colder than they actually felt. They allowed you to walk away believing they had stopped caring. That is the moment they would change if they were given one chance to return to the past. Not because they believe one conversation could magically fix everything, but because they know that conversation would have given you the truth. And they now understand that you deserved the truth before you were forced to make peace with their silence. They said they often wonder whether you went home that day questioning yourself. Whether you wondered if you had loved too deeply. Whether you blamed yourself for something that was never entirely yours to carry. That thought has become painful for them because they know their inability to communicate may have caused you to doubt your own value. They also admitted something else that surprised the person listening to them. After losing you, they compared almost every meaningful connection that entered their life to what they had with you. They tried not to. They knew it wasn't fair. But little things kept reminding them. A conversation would happen and they would remember how naturally you understood them. Someone would make a promise and they would remember how seriously you treated your word. They would sit in a crowded room and suddenly remember the kind of peace they once felt simply sitting beside you without needing to say anything at all. That was when they started realizing that what they missed wasn't excitement or attention. They missed emotional safety. They missed being known. And that realization became even stronger when they began noticing how much they themselves had changed since losing you. They became more careful with people. More guarded. More aware of how quickly something meaningful can disappear when it is neglected. They learned how damaging pride can become when two people are waiting for the other one to speak first. They learned that assumptions can destroy things that honest conversations might have saved. Most painfully, they learned that sometimes you don't understand the value of someone's patience until that patience is no longer available to you. They confessed that there were several moments when they nearly came back. One evening they even wrote out everything they wanted to tell you. It wasn't a short message. It was the kind of confession that had clearly been building for a long time. They wrote about the fear they had hidden, the pressure they had allowed to influence them, and the regret that had followed them since the day things changed between you. They admitted that they still remembered details about you that they had no reason to remember unless some part of them had never truly let go. But when they finished writing, they stared at the message and couldn't send it. Because another fear stopped them. They wondered whether contacting you would bring healing or simply reopen something you had fought hard to survive. They wondered whether apologizing would be for your peace or their own relief. And for the first time, they realized that wanting you back and deserving another chance were not necessarily the same thing. That realization humbled them. They knew they couldn't simply appear again and expect you to erase everything that happened. If they ever came forward, they would have to come with accountability, not excuses. That is why their recent confession was so different from anything they had said before. They weren't asking anyone to convince you to return. They weren't trying to make themselves look like the victim. They were finally admitting where they had failed you. They said they should have defended the connection more strongly when other voices became too loud. They should have spoken directly to you instead of making assumptions. They should have trusted the history between you instead of letting one difficult season define everything. And above all, they should never have allowed you to leave thinking that you were easy to replace. Because according to them, you weren't. The strongest part of their confession came when they were asked one simple question: if you could tell them only one thing now, what would it be? For several seconds, they couldn't answer. Then they said they wouldn't start by saying, "I miss you." They wouldn't start by saying, "Come back." They wouldn't even start by saying, "I still love you." They said the first thing they would tell you is, "You were right to expect more from me." That sentence revealed how deeply their perspective has changed. They finally understand that love is not measured by how intensely someone feels after losing you. It is measured by what they are willing to do while they still have the opportunity to protect the connection. And that is exactly why their regret has become so difficult to carry. They know there were things they could have done differently. They know there were words they should have spoken sooner. They know there were moments when they chose avoidance instead of courage. But there is another reason this confession is happening now. Something has recently changed in their life that has made them feel they may not have unlimited time to keep avoiding this truth. A conversation with someone close to them forced them to answer a question they had been running from for a long time. They were asked whether they could genuinely imagine moving forward into the next chapter of their life while never telling you what really happened. And their answer came immediately. No. But what they revealed right after that answer was even more unexpected, because apparently they have already made one private decision involving you. And nobody around them knows exactly what they are planning to do next. That private decision has been weighing on them heavily because this time they know they cannot hide behind uncertainty. For a long time, they kept telling themselves that if the right moment ever came, they would finally speak. They would explain everything, apologize properly, and allow you to hear the truth directly from them instead of through assumptions, silence, or other people. But every time that moment seemed close, fear found another reason to delay it. They worried you had moved on. They worried you would refuse to listen. They worried that hearing your voice again would make every emotion they had worked so hard to control come rushing back. Yet something has changed now. They finally understand that staying silent is also a decision, and it is the same kind of decision that helped them lose you in the first place. They admitted that recently they went back through things connected to your history together. Not because they were trying to live in the past, but because they wanted to understand exactly where everything began to fall apart. Old conversations, forgotten memories, little details they had pushed away suddenly became impossible to ignore. And the more they looked back, the more clearly they could see a pattern. You had been trying to communicate with them long before the final distance happened. There were moments when you asked simple questions that were really invitations for honesty. There were moments when you became quieter because you were tired of guessing. There were moments when they could have reached for you emotionally, but instead they convinced themselves there would always be more time. Now they know there wasn't. What hurts them is realizing that you may have interpreted their silence as a lack of love when, according to what they finally confessed, the truth was almost the opposite. Their feelings had become so intense that they didn't know how to handle them. They were afraid of making promises they might not be able to keep. They were afraid of disappointing you. They were afraid that if you saw how uncertain and overwhelmed they really were, you would look at them differently. So instead of being vulnerable, they became distant. Instead of saying, "I'm scared," they acted as though they didn't care. Instead of saying, "I need you to understand what I'm dealing with," they gave you reasons to believe they wanted space. And that choice became one of the biggest mistakes of their life. Don't skip. Because during this confession they finally explained what losing you actually taught them. They said there is a huge difference between missing someone because you feel lonely and missing someone because you realize they were genuinely irreplaceable in your life. At first, they thought the emptiness would fade. They believed time would eventually make your absence feel normal. They assumed new routines, new people, and new responsibilities would slowly push the memories further away. But something unexpected happened instead. The more life moved forward, the clearer certain memories of you became. They remembered how you stayed during moments when they were difficult to understand. They remembered times when you could have judged them but chose patience. They remembered the way you encouraged them when they doubted themselves. These weren't dramatic memories. That was exactly what made them so powerful. They were ordinary moments that only became extraordinary once they were gone. A quiet conversation. A simple check-in. A look across a room that made them feel understood without explanation. Small pieces of emotional safety that they had once assumed would always be there. And now they realized those were the things that mattered most. They opened up about a recent conversation with someone who knew both sides of the story better than they expected. This person didn't comfort them. They didn't tell them what they wanted to hear. Instead, they asked a painful question: if you knew losing them would hurt this much, why didn't you fight harder when you still had the chance? Your person reportedly went completely quiet. Because there was no easy answer. Every excuse they had repeated for years suddenly sounded weak when spoken out loud. Pressure wasn't enough of an explanation. Fear wasn't enough. Pride wasn't enough. They finally admitted that somewhere inside themselves, they had believed your love would always be available. Even if they pulled away, they assumed some invisible connection would keep you waiting. They thought they could return once their life became easier, once other people stopped interfering, once they understood themselves better. But they failed to consider what that waiting was doing to you. They failed to understand that while they were taking time to figure everything out, You were being asked to survive emotional uncertainty without any promise that they would ever return. That realization changed something inside them. They said that if they ever get another opportunity to speak to you, they don't want to begin by explaining why they left. They want to begin by acknowledging what staying silent did to you. Because they now understand that explanations can sometimes sound like excuses when accountability comes too late. They want you to know that they recognize the difference. They recognize that you may have spent nights wondering what you did wrong. You may have replayed conversations searching for the exact sentence that changed everything. You may have questioned whether the connection meant as much to them as it meant to you. And according to their confession, it did. Perhaps that is exactly why they struggled so much afterward. They described moments when something good happened in their life and their first instinct was still to tell you. Moments when they received news and automatically imagined what your reaction would have been. Moments when they found themselves mentally preparing a story for you before remembering that they no longer had the kind of access to you they once did. Those small moments became reminders that losing you wasn't one dramatic event. It was hundreds of little losses happening over and over again. They lost the ability to call you without thinking twice. They lost the person who knew the meaning behind their silences. They lost the comfort of knowing someone was genuinely rooting for them. And somewhere along the way, they realized they had also lost a version of themselves that seemed to exist more naturally when you were close. That admission became deeply emotional because they finally said something they had been afraid to say even privately. They don't believe they became happier after losing you. They became more controlled, more careful, perhaps even more successful in certain areas, but happiness was different. There was a softness missing. A sense of home they couldn't recreate simply by filling their life with activity. This is why the private decision they made matters so much. They have decided they no longer want to let other people speak for them. No friend. No family member. No mutual connection. No one who only knows pieces of what really happened. If the truth ever reaches you, they want it to come directly from them. They know they may not receive the response they secretly hope for, but they have reached a point where they would rather face an uncomfortable truth than continue living behind unanswered questions. But before they approach you, there is one thing they believe they need to do first. They recently contacted someone connected to the period when your relationship began falling apart. Someone who knew more about the pressure, confusion, and misunderstanding surrounding the two of you than either of you realized at the time. Your person wanted one final answer before speaking to you because they needed to know whether their memories of that period were accurate. And apparently, that person finally answered. What they revealed didn't just confirm one of your person's biggest fears. It exposed a detail about your separation that your person says you were never supposed to discover. And after hearing it, they made one promise. This time, they will not stay silent.